Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. I'm Jonathan Ferro, along with Lisa Abramowitz and Anne-Marie Hordern. Join us each day for insight from the best in markets, economics and geopolitics. From our global headquarters in New York City, we are live on Bloomberg Television weekday mornings from 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify or anywhere else you listen. And as always, on the Bloomberg Terminal and the Bloomberg Business app.
We begin this out with stock sliding following yesterday's chip rout. Stephen Auth, the Federated, lowering his year-end price target on the S&P to 7,500 and writing this. The sell-off was overdue, given the violence of the last few weeks. We remain cautious on software names as many are potential value traps. Steve joins us now for more. Steve, welcome to the programme. I've been looking forward to catching up with this really interesting note. I think we should start from this. You are not bearish. You still think earnings are going to be okay. This seems to be a call on valuation, Steve. Just share with us your thoughts about how your thoughts on valuations are developing and comparing now to maybe where we were a few decades ago.
Yeah, Jonathan, actually, the piece you cited was really inspired by a conversation you all were having on surveillance a couple of weeks ago about the confusion around the macros seem to be pretty good, yet the market is having trouble. And I think what we're saying is that the reason the macros are pretty good, but the problem with the market right now is that there's a whole hunk of it that was dependent on two different arguments for why it should have a higher valuation. One is the Mag 7 were giant free cash flow generators with big moats around them, and free cash flow is worth more in terms of a dollar earnings than an asset-heavy company because the dollars that come right back to the shareholders are supposed to have to be reinvested in the ground or a big piece of a big asset. And the Mag 7 are no longer free cash flow generators, at least for the present, because they're spending 80% of it, 90% of it on AI. And the debate around NVIDIA versus the Mag 7, or the rest of the Mag 7 is this going to go on forever or is this a one-off? And that debate's really not settled. So you've lost the free cash flow, and then on top of that, you've got all these asset-light businesses, Block being a perfect example, that, you know, a couple of guys in a garage coding software, and that they were all the rage for the last 10 years because you didn't need any assets at all to generate earnings. It's all intellectual capital that you're selling at very high margins. And the question is, can those margins hold up in a world where your competitor is now AI, not a software engineer? And so those businesses are under pressure, and the valuation is a question mark. And so when you put the two together, the valuation, I give a fair valuation on the S&P, we think is lower than it was 6 months ago. So we've we've increased our earnings forecast, actually. We're at 410 3 years out now on earnings, which is ahead of the street a little bit because the macros look good. But a lot of that acceleration in earnings is coming outside of the set of stocks I just talked about. It's coming in, lo and behold, the asset-heavy businesses, that are actually doing pretty well, which, by the way, includes Europe and Japan and Asia and Korea, which I know you guys have also been talking about. But a lot of those businesses are the very businesses that are enjoying part of this pickup. They're beneficiaries of AI, and they're less prone to being cannibalized by AI.
So, Steve, as you know, for a long time, for much of the last decade, the US equity market, the index, has demanded a greater valuation, a higher premium compared to the rest of the world. Is that eroding before our eyes? Is that something that's not repairable given the shifts that you describe?
Well, I think it's still going to probably attain a premium for what it's worth. We've cut our long-term estimate on the multiple for the market from 22 to 20, whereas everything else we'd still say roughly call it 18. So we think it's still a premium for one because it's got a more fulsome capital market, more flexible, et cetera. And, we've kind of exaggerated to make a point on asset-light, high free cash flow. Sooner or later, the big Mag 7 companies will start generating cash flow. Either AI, again, free cash flow, either AI is going to work and they're going to have a lot more profits, or it's not going to work and they're going to pull back and generate free cash flow that way. So one of the things that's, I think, attractive about the Mag 7 here And we think you can sort of pick within those. We like Amazon as an example right now. But, one thing that's attractive about it is at some point, they still are, their base businesses are still very, very profitable. And they can just return to that if they have to. So you're not dealing with a mirage in terms of what you've got here. And no one else really has that. So, yeah, I think you're right. The premium's probably lower than it was, but we still think there's a reason to have a premium there. We just have cut it back. And really what we're trying to signal to our clients is we're probably in a kind of single-digit return market here, not a double-digit return market. And if that's the case, that changes what kind of stocks you want to own. As an example, dividend stocks, which are a big hunk of the value indices, you can get half your return in cash, basically, or at least a third of it. And, that starts to look a lot more attractive, a 3 or 4% dividend yield against an 8 or 9% market, as opposed to against a 15 or 20% market.
The story you're telling, Steve, seems to benefit companies that are harder to disrupt. I don't understand why NVIDIA isn't among those. I don't understand what happened yesterday, why the shares are down 5.5% after delivering earnings that beat expectations with 75% margins and talking about, ongoing pipeline that's really significant. What's the tell for markets in terms of this response to earnings that otherwise were pretty good?
Right. Lisa, one of the issues is there's not one narrative here. So the harder to disrupt narrative, that's really kind of the software names, high intellectual capital names. NVIDIA is not a completely asset-light business. It's a high free cash flow generator, and it falls into that ilk. NVIDIA is, in some ways, the primary beneficiary of the AI build-out, right? I mean, everyone needs their chips. And it's a pretty powerful story. That's why the stock has done so well in the last 5 years. But the debate around AI kind of centers on NVIDIA in a way, right? Either these Mag 7 companies, they would say, hey, we're kind of in a one-off spending cycle here. Once we get to nirvana, we'll be back to being high free cash flow generators. If that's the case, where's NVIDIA going to sell to? Right? Because they've got to replace last year's sale first before they even start next year's sale. So on the other hand, if this is going to go on forever, and if you listen to Wang, he would say it's going to last 10 years, well, then NVIDIA is a screaming buy here because it's the only player in town. Maybe you could say AMD. So there's a real debate around NVIDIA right now. It's not a stock we hate, frankly. We would still be involved with that stock for that reason. It's not going to get cannibalized here. That's not going to happen. The question is AI going to work?
Yeah.
And is it going to keep growing out? And if it does, NVIDIA is a screaming buy here.
Steve, I just want to finish up. I know you're a really deep thinker, and I'm sure you've been following some of these Substacks and some of the arguments and discussions around the future of the labor market and humanity in the wake of AI. What's been your response to this week and sort of the increasing flurry that kicked off Sunday evening with Citrini's research and then, spurred all of the rebuttals and then the pile-on?
Well, one reason we've been signaling to our investors, look, there's a violent rotation we're in the middle of, more's to come, is we don't want people to panic when that happens. So, frankly, we're not in a panic, as you might guess, because we're probably mostly tilted where we want to be. In terms of the Citrini research, it's very interesting, but frankly, I may be a deep thinker, but I don't know that I have the imagination fully to guess where this economy is going to go. But all I know from watching the history of economic development over the last 500 years, every time there's a major invention that disrupts the current status quo, and the economy grows as a result of the efficiencies and productivity enhancements that happen, and this is huge this time around for sure, somehow or other, those XX personnel, if you will, get redeployed to even a higher value-added activity, and the economy grows even more. And I just got to believe that there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there that are going to figure out a way to use those very high talented, white-collar workers to do even more. And I know within our own business, we're seeing that at Federated, Hermes, and I think a lot of other businesses are seeing the same thing. So it's not necessarily the case. I think it's the folks that don't have the imagination that are left expecting, the doomsday scenario. I just don't see that. It's never happened before, and I don't think it's going to happen now.
Stay with us. More Bloomberg surveillance coming up after this. AI in full focus this morning. The standoff between Anthropic and the Pentagon over military safeguards is ramping up. The tech giant facing a deadline today to accept conditions or be blacklisted. The Anthropic CEO, Dario Amodei, saying in a statement, quote, "These threats do not change our position. We cannot in good conscience accede to their request." The US Undersecretary of Defense, Emil, responding to the statement, calling Amodei a liar with a God complex. The Undersecretary joins us now for more. Undersecretary Michael, welcome to the program, sir. Calling someone a liar is pretty strong language. What's he lying about?
Well, what happened is we've been negotiating in good faith on the Department of War side for about 3 months. And we're working pretty diligently, and we sent over a proposal that we thought made a lot of concessions to the language that Anthropic wanted. And then, without any notice, they published an article where we thought we were getting close, saying that they were breaking off talks well before the deadline, which is generally not good partner-oriented practice, if you will.
So, Emil, this is what they're asking for, as far as we understand. And let me share this with the audience. It doesn't want its technology used for surveillance of US citizens or for autonomous lethal strikes without a human in the loop. That's the ask. What were the concessions?
Yeah, the concessions are pretty simple. We agreed in writing to ensure that the Department of War was following all laws and regulations, including the National Security Act of 1947, the FISA Act, and all other applicable laws and regulations, because mass surveillance of Americans is already illegal. So we were offering to put all of that language and affirm that we were following all laws in the contract. When it comes to autonomous weapons, similarly, we said we'll follow all laws, including a DoD directive that's been in place for years that governs how we would use any such weapons. And then we affirmed that there would be human oversight over every kind of part of the development process or engagement process or use of autonomous weapons. And he didn't like the word, I guess, as appropriate at the end of that sentence. But we believe we conceded to all their substantive demands. So it was surprising that out of nowhere they'd cut off negotiations.
So it appears that your differences are actually minor. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, and that's what was surprising, is usually if your differences are minor, you get in a room, you try to hash them out, and instead, without any notice, publishes something about his conscience, and then doesn't engage. And it was difficult to understand why, because we were working pretty diligently on this, and we were at the final stages of a few words here or there where we agreed to what they wanted. So in substance, so it was very surprising, given that we negotiate with hundreds of technology companies, and this is the only one we've ever had that behavior from.
Are you still weighing using the Defense Production Act to compel Anthropic to basically have to use its product, or potentially are you weighing still making it a supply chain risk, which we heard from Anthropic say that this is almost contradictory proposals?
They're two different things, and I think depending on how today goes, at 5 o'clock, the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, gets to make the decision on how to reply. I've maintained my openness to continue dialogue through that deadline, but they've seemed to have launched sort of a PR campaign that was planned well before these negotiations sort of restarted on Tuesday. So I don't know. And so their behavior is frankly unpredictable. I'm not sure what to expect.
So do you plan, though, on having more talks today, or does a decision just need to be made by today?
I offered more talks. So long as they're in good faith, we're always open to talks, and we set a deadline, and we met the deadline, and up until that deadline, I'm open to more talks, and I told them so. So
what does happen at 5:01 today if there's no agreement between the DoD and Anthropic?
That's up to Secretary Hegseth. We have some courses of action that he's considering, and ultimately this comes down to the warfighter, right? It comes down to, for any AI system we might use, Are we using it to protect our warfighters in the right way? Are we using it to sort of give them the best tools to be efficient and to be lethal when they have to be lethal? And that's the primary thing in Secretary Hegseth's head. And we told them that ultimately, at the end of the day, we follow the law, all laws, but we can't let any one company stand between us and the warfighter. Because they don't make the rules. Congress makes the rules. The president signed them. We execute them, and we do so safely. Well,
speaking of the president, has he weighed in on this specifically? Has there been discussions with him and Secretary Hegseth and yourself as well?
This has all been internal to the Department of War so far.
Okay, and then when it comes to potentially the other AI negotiations underway, what is going on right now with XAI and to get Grok on classified networks?
Well, I think the smart approach, when I came in at the Department of War about 9 months ago and looked at what we were using AI for, and it was some pretty minimal use cases. And given the power of the technology and the potential power to do good for the U.S. military, both from an efficiency standpoint and a strength standpoint, I wanted to make sure we had a lot of options. So we went around and we've launched Google for unclassified networks. We've signed XAI for classified and unclassified networks, and we want to continue to provide options to all of our components here at DOW, and that's what we'll continue to do. And it's just smart to have more than one option so that we can see the strengths and weaknesses of each model and learn from them as the AI revolution begins here.
Undersecretary Michael, is lethal autonomy really so critical for future national security?
It is. I mean, if you think about it from a defense standpoint, whether it's a drone swarm that's coming at a military base, whether it's a hypersonic missile coming at the United States, where the reaction time against the sort of, how many weapons are coming at you, you want to be able to take them down potentially faster than a human could alone. If that's how it's done. And we're learning from the Russia-Ukraine war with the drone swarms and so on, and with the new weapons that have been developed all over the world that change the name of war, the game of warfare, that we've got to respond and defend ourselves in any way we can. The question is, do you have a human on the loop to make sure that we're monitoring these systems? And that's what we proposed in writing, in language, that we always have human oversight over these things. But they're necessary given what's happening in the world.
Emil, clearly the technology these companies are producing is tremendously powerful. Yet you believe this individual is both a liar and has a God complex. How concerned should the American public be about individuals like this running companies like this, if that's what you believe this person is?
Yeah, I think there's some concern that, when you have leaders of some of these companies talking about unemploying 70 million Americans, the lawsuits they're under for sort of scraping content from content publishers and having billion-dollar lawsuits against them, using that content to make profits. And then really what's concerning is making their own policies that sort of and could sit on top of democratic policies that are voted on by the people, passed by Congress, signed by the president. You do have to worry about, are they taking it too far? Are they trying to do and impose their own views on the American people in an undemocratic way? So I think those things are going to be things we're grappling with in society for the next several years as these companies get bigger and bigger.
Stay with us. More Bloomberg surveillance coming up after this.
Let's turn to this story. US and Iranian officials agreeing to another round of nuclear talks next week in Vienna after wrapping up negotiations in Geneva. A person familiar with the US position saying Americans were disappointed with the progress of talks. Amos Hochstein, the managing partner at TWG Global and former senior White House senior advisor, joins us now for more. Hello, sir. It's good to see you.
It's great to be here with you.
Amos, what moment are we in right now? How tense are these negotiations?
Well, the moment that we're in is very serious, as the president said, because I think that we're gearing and rolling towards a war that I'm not even sure the president wants to do, but yet the momentum is in that direction. As far as the negotiations, I'm still not sure if these negotiations are for real. I think they began as a sham negotiation, meaning we weren't ready. The president went off script and promised action in Iran and got himself stuck in am I going to be like Obama with a red line or not with the protesters? And so suddenly there was this momentum towards go to war, but you then realize, well, I don't have the forces actually on the ground in the region to do anything because I moved them all out to go to Venezuela. So now I got to get more forces and I need more time. The Gulf is split between those who really want to go to war and those who are very, very concerned about it because they think it's not going to go well. So he gets the mixed messaging from the Gulf. The Israelis are pushing him to do it, obviously. And so the buildup starts, and he needs to be able to tell the Europeans and the Middle East folks, look, I tried to do a negotiation. If we go to war, he has to be able to check a box that says, it wasn't my first option. I tried, the Iranians screwed up. He's aided by the fact that the Iranians always rise to the moment to screw up every situation that you're in. They literally mess everything up. They have no idea what the world is like. They live in some wacko bubble of threatening U.S. forces when they're trying to do a negotiation.
How difficult is it to negotiate with the Iranians?
Well, it's not even direct negotiations. They have this ridiculous theater of we can't sit face to face, and we do it through the Omanis, despite the fact 10 years ago they sat face to face for months with Wendy Sherman and John Kerry and so on. And it's the same people, by the way. It's Arachi, who was then the deputy. So it's very complicated. I think the Iranian system is going through a moment where the supreme leader is the crazy old man who throws out tweets that mess up what everybody else in the Iranian system is doing because he's disconnected from the system.
Well, it's existential for the Iranian regime, which is why the question for them is, would it be better to have a deal at the negotiating table or to shore up their place in Iranian society? Is it better almost for the U.S. to strike them?
Look, the distance between the Iranian society and the government has never been bigger. I mean, these people just massacred. I don't know if the numbers are floating around, but
horrific.
Thousands of people were killed by their own government, which is not missiles, not nuclear. That's the impetus for this war, right? Remember, we did not talk about missiles or nuclear as the reason to go to this conflict because there is no real imminent threat from those two issues, right? They were, quote unquote, obliterated the nuclear program 6 months ago.
But they still have a goal to make a nuclear weapon. Their DNI assessment says they are barreling towards intercontinental ballistic missiles, and they're still funding the proxies around the region. Those are the three red lines of the administration.
There's no doubt the Iranian threat to the region in December and today are the same from that perspective. As the president said, the nuclear program was set back years, not months. And the missile program is the one that is really of concern. But that wasn't what led us here, Anne-Marie. It was the protesters. Help is on the way. And so now the decision is, what kind of war do you go to? And I think this is a critical point that people are missing. There are three basic options here on this war. Only three. One is a slightly more limited strike that takes out missile depots, missile storage, launchers, and maybe another strike at the nuclear for symbolic purposes. But you leave the regime intact, but weakened, very weakened. Most of the Gulfies prefer this option. The other one is a much more significant attack, which they have the preparation for at CENTCOM and Central Command, which is a regime collapse or change. And that's where the two options are. You don't know in advance if you're going to get regime collapse or regime change. Regime change is when you know who comes next and you know that you can figure this out. Think Venezuela and Delcy, right? You know who's coming. Regime collapse is you have no idea. And as one major Gulf country said to me at the leadership level, if they're going, we'd hate the Iranians, but if they end up with Libya, they leave us with Libya next door, that's a real problem for all of us.
Isn't there a third option? And not to put you on the spot, but the Biden administration did nothing when it came to Iran and just dragged on talks for 4 years.
The Biden administration said we're willing to renegotiate going back into the JCPOA that the Trump administration had left, but we're not going to go in as just re-signing the same document. The Iranians did not want to negotiate. Then October 7 happened. And remember, we were doing the normalization with Saudi Arabia. We were really weeks away from that when October 7 happened. The Iranians then chose to do a 300 projectile attack on Israel from its sovereign territory with the 100 ballistic missiles and 200 UAVs. And they did that attack twice, in April and October of 2024. The United States then gave the green light and talked with the Israelis about taking out the missile defense and weakening the Iranians. The Iranian proxies are weakened across the board. So you can say do nothing, but in reality was continuing the sanctions pressure and not getting into the JCPOA was a major decision. If you go back to the elections of 2020, everybody said, every Middle East expert said, Joe Biden's going to get elected and go right back into the JCPOA. And it did not happen.
Because he put Bob Malley in head of the Iranian affairs.
Maybe, but the person who makes the decision is not Rob Malley. He was the president, and he said no.
I just want to fit this in because we're talking about this and talking about ballistic missiles and a lot of the weaponry of the past, at least as this is very quickly moving. And we're talking about new weapons of war, which include a lot of technologically fused instruments. How does the use of artificial intelligence and the U.S.'s preeminence in that sphere change this discussion and, frankly, change all discussions going forward when it comes to some military negotiations?
So I think this is a key point. When Emery's talking about sort of they're building out their missile capacity and so on, Iran is a relic. All right? It's literally a relic. So what if it has a bunch of missiles that we can put some use? We don't want them to have it for sure. We don't want them to give them to the Houthis and to Hezbollah and so on. But when you talk about advanced weaponry, the capability of fusing intelligence superiority with satellite superiority, with AI and drones, the Iranians can do the drones for Russia, but the Russia-Ukraine war is also a relic. The advantages that the United States has, the advantages that Israel has in the region, including total air superiority from Israel all the way to Tehran. This is not really a threat it's a menace, it's a nuisance, it's dangerous, but it's not an existential threat. Its nuclear program would be. And every president of the United States, every single one, Democrat and Republican, has said we will not allow them to have a nuclear program, which is why I supported what President Trump did by attacking those sites. If you're going to keep doing those programs, that's a real threat. But the rest, we're going to an era of such technological advancement, whether or not the Pentagon can get out of its own way with AI. We should be able, I'm sorry.
What are your thoughts?
I really hope that both the company and the Pentagon can go back to having this conversation in classified settings and in private, and not in front of the whole world. And I also really hope that this is not corporate against corporate playing out in government contracts.
What are you implying?
I'm implying that there's another AI company that may not be so happy with Anthropic getting this kind of advantage by being. Do you think that's had some influence
to bring us to this moment?
I think 12 months ago I would have said no way. I think that watching the last 12 months where the government decides M&As, decides corporate activity, it's not a big leap. And it's understandable. I also understand why corporations would have this kind of a fight at the Pentagon, because the government is the ultimate arbiter now in major corporate decisions, right? Not on every one, but on major ones. If you're going to buy a news channel or not, it's the White House that decides who gets to own it or not. So it's not that big of a leap to say if the president and the White House decides who does major M&A, why is it such a big leap to think this is not exactly about Pentagon versus Anthropic? Anthropic and the government seem not to be that far when it comes to what their requirements are. So they should have been able to reach a deal. It's just a weird kind of I don't understand this at all.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, bringing you the best in markets, economics and geopolitics. You can watch the show live on Bloomberg TV weekday mornings from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Eastern. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify or anywhere else you listen. And as always, on the Bloomberg Terminal and the Bloomberg Business app.